friends, and welcome back to Ghouls Night In, the spooky chat show with your best ghoul friends. I'm Penny Snark.
And I'm Midge Munster. And Penny, I'm going to do a little bit of a pop quiz with you.
Oh, okay. I'm ready.
Do you remember what the title of the third episode of Ghouls Night In was?
Oh, shoot. Okay. The first one is Punkin' Chunkin'. The
Uh-huh.
second one was Ouija board. The third one was Birds and the Bees something?
You're so close. Yeah, it was the bats and the
The
bees.
Bats and the Bees. I was like, I remember Birds and Bees, and I'm like, that, I don't know what that would have been about.
Yes, it was about our nocturnal pollinators, bats. That was a Penny episode, which is still one of my fave episodes.
Why,
And
thank you.
the episode where I learned that bat butts existed on Instagram. So
Yes, a very
thanks
important
for
discovery.
thanks for that, Pennifer. But we did not in that episode cover the second half of that title, bees.
We did not.
And we did not. And there has been some stuff going on that has got me excited and wanting to talk about bees. Namely, if any of y'all have watched my most recent YouTube video, I did a vlog of spooky stuff to do around Kansas City,
Mhm.
and I showed that there are beehives that have been put in my local historic cemetery in downtown Kansas City. And I think this is pretty freaking cool for a couple of reasons. Firstly, just because they made their hives look like tombstones, which is like
That's
the
so
cool,
rad.
it's so insanely cool. Just shout out to that, first of all. But secondly, I love bees. I've always had an affinity for them. My first tattoo was of a bee,
Mhm.
and it is my dream to be a beekeeper someday. But thirdly, why this fits into Ghouls Night. Like, yes, I suppose there are probably people who are scared of bees,
Oh, yes.
um, but that is not what we're addressing today. Bees have their own special connections to death and the afterlife. So, if you, like me, maybe have a vested interest in bees or want to also keep bees at some point in your life, there is some really cool folklore here that you might want to be privy to. And so we're gonna dig into that a little bit today.
Heck yeah.
Heck yeah! So, Penny, are you familiar with the old custom of telling the bees?
I am familiar with this.
I figured you probably were. But for those of you who may not know, there is a practice from parts of Western Europe called telling the bees. This is mostly known in to be associated with England,
Mhm.
but it has also been recorded in Ireland, in Wales, Germany, the Netherlands, France, Switzerland, and the United States.
That's a
So
lot of
there's
places.
lots of places that have observed this practice. And this basically involves making sure that the bees and the hives that are on anyone's particular property are told of important events in their keeper's household. Of course, that also includes births, marriages, just general travel departures and returns, but it very specifically is in dealing with death.
Mhm.
And it was believed that if this custom of telling the bees when something had happened was forgotten, that the bees would stop producing honey, they might leave the hive, or they may even die if the bees are not properly put into mourning. So, this was a really important spiritual practice for a lot of people. And there's a really rich history behind this that comes way before telling the bees is even a thing. But this was also because bees are really seen as part of a family a lot of times when they are kept. And their hives were often seen as kind of a mirror to the keeper's household. And so their grief was also viewed as very, very real.
Mm.
And people would let the bees grieve. They would drape their hives in black cloth sometimes. Some places even offer bees funeral food or sing to them. Um, and this all kind of ties to the idea that bees are believed to be messengers of the dead. And that goes way, 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 way back.
Way back.
Way back across all kinds of time periods and cultures. Um, so let's see a few different instances of that here. This is, of course, a small cross sample of
Yeah.
bees folklore across centuries of time, but they have been revered in so many different cultures. Uh, Starting with the Greeks in their mythology, insects in general were often associated with the soul. In fact, the Greek word, or the root of the word psyche, that can be used to talk about like the human spirit.
Hmm.
The root of that word actually derives from butterfly or night moth.
Oh.
So lots of like association with insects and the soul. And bees were also heavily considered by the Greeks to be soul bearers, and that sometimes even the soul left the body as bees, and
Oh.
that the bees would carry that soul into the afterlife. Also, in this same time, the Three which were a group of prophetic sister nymphs, they were like part of the Oracle of Delphi. If you're familiar with that
Hmm.
lore, they were associated with that, and they were often depicted as having the body of like the upper body of a woman and the bottom half of a bee, like an
Oh.
abdomen and little
Like
bee
the
legs
bee
and wings.
mermaid.
Yes, literally a bee mermaid. And so that imagery of the three that started linking bees to the idea of the divine and prophecy. There are also several records of people being buried with gold bee tokens. There's even some where like the bee token is in the mouth of the
Mm.
deceased, believing that the bee would guide them safely and pull their soul kind of out of the body and guided them into the next world. And of course, I think a lot of us are, if you had any kind of ancient Egyptian
Hey.
fascination as a child, there's a lot of bee belief in Egypt as well. Um, they were said to have been born from the tears of the sun god. Ra is how like
Mm.
bees were supposed to have come to exist, and honey was really heavily associated with death and
Hmm.
the gods. Honey was a lot of times used in embalming or in the sealing of sarcophagi to kind of protect and sweeten death. And of course, too, we see a lot of bee imagery even in Christianity. Um, there was a Saint Christum, I believe is the, I'm probably getting that wrong, but their bees were referred to as like creatures of resurrection
No, I'm
because
sure.
they emerge from their hives in the spring, and it's like they rise from the dead, like someone else in
Someone
Christianity that
else we know.
maybe maybe you've heard of him before. And then my favorite like bee lore is from the Celtic folklore. And this is another culture that kind of floated the bee as a psychopomp, or a thing that guides souls from this
Hmm.
world to the next. Um, they were definitely revered as otherworldly beings, capable of crossing the veil, acting as messengers. Like the Greeks, the Celtic people also had belief that the soul would leave the body as a bee or a butterfly, which I also just find that kind of thing fascinating, where just we're so divided by religion and things
Right,
anymore.
yeah.
But when you really like delve deep into a lot of these cultures and practices and beliefs, like so many things were the same
Right,
across.
yeah. Like we
Mm.
care about the same things and like
Yeah.
tend to imagine, parts of our world the same way in like kind of a spiritual lens.
Yeah, everybody was looking at bees and being like,
Yep.
"Oh, those definitely are going across the veil."
Totally. Those guys are going across the veil nonstop.
They know what's up. Um, and of course, for any of you witches out there who maybe have worked or do work with Brigid, she is a Celtic deity who has a very strong connection to bees. Brigid's bees were that's that's a great
Bridget's bees.
it sounds like a company. I guess I'm thinking of Burt's Bees, but and Betty's Bees from Pushing Daisies. But yeah, Bridget's bees. Bridget was said to have had like an apple orchard, an otherworldly apple orchard, and her bees were sacred and would bring their nectar from the after orchard into the human world. But bees were very sacred, and it was considered a terrible thing to harm a bee because that might be someone's soul trying to cross.
Yeah.
Uh, It wasn't, though, until kind of the late 1800s that we really start seeing bees take center of this, like, specific idea of talking to the bees or telling the bees in funeral practice. Uh, in Wales, this kind of developed as the bees really are being considered part of the mourners of the deceased.
Hmm.
Um, so it was not uncommon after a death for the hive to be moved slightly and turned out to face the road. And the bees would be offered the first sip of wine or piece of cake at the wake of the deceased. They might even have. There's also like, of course, this varies depending on region and who you're talking to, but some believe that the soul of the deceased might actually like enter the hive of the bees.
Ooh.
So like disrespecting the bees was a dangerous thing. You wanted to
Yeah.
really be on top of that. There's also where this kind of gets really solidified is a lot of instances of art and literature from this time period that surround telling the bees. There is a really beautiful painting from 1895 by British artist Charles Napier Hemy titled The Widow. And shows like a woman in her mourning clothes. She has a young boy with her, assuming that is, if it's the widow, assuming that's probably
Hmm.
the child.
Yeah.
And they are standing next to their beehives, walking through a field behind their house. And this is Penny's been wondering this whole time. We're able to give ourselves little like titles in the
Yeah.
recording studio. And I have given myself the title today of Der Bienenfreund, which translates to the bee friend.
Be friend.
And this was an 1863 painting by German artist Hans Thoma that depicts a man sitting and telling the bees of a passing. The first I ever encountered this phrase was in an 1858 poem by John Greenleaf Whittier. I took a poetry, which was one of the worst classes I ever took, by the way. What's the opposite of a shout out?
Ooh.
Calling out the
Call
worst.
out. We
Yeah,
used
call.
to in my college newspaper, they used to have
Mhm.
a column called hats off slash fuck off. And you could submit stuff. So that's how we did things in Beloit.
Well, there you go. Hats off to poetry, but fuck off to
Fuck
the
off to
guy
this
who
course in particular.
taught this class because he was the worst. But I do remember reading this poem called "Telling the Bees," that details this man returning home after a month, and he's like really excited to see his. I don't know if they're married or not, but the woman he
Hmm.
loves, he's excited to see her And as he comes over the hill, he's detailing like, oh, I see our house and I see our trees and oh, I love this place. And then like he slowly starts realizing that things are off. Like the dog is
Mm.
like whining on the porch, and the big revelation that he has is that there's a young like girl outside draping the beehives in black
Oh
cloth
no.
and singing to the bees that Mistress Mary is dead.
Oh.
So very sad.
Yeah.
Uh, but this really persisted pretty well, especially in German and Dutch communities in America. Like even into the the early 20th century, that this was still pretty heavily practiced. It's definitely not as much in practice these days, but there are still, especially beekeepers, that are keeping this tradition alive.
Yeah.
There was a 2019 article published in Beecraft magazine,
Hey, we
and
love a
they
niche magazine.
I know, but that's when I found this. I was like, how do I get a subscription to Beecraft magazine? But they published an article in 2019 talking about what telling the bees is and why it is and yada yada.
Mhm.
To which several people wrote back, telling their own stories about their experiences with this. And really, really interesting. Of course, a lot of this is probably anecdotal, right?
Sure.
But there were stories of like bees who refused to work after their beekeeper's death, hives that were swarming uncontrollably for some period after. And my favorite, which I'm like, I hope this is true. I'm sure it's probably not, but it's so goth. There's a story about bees that returned with only like dark and black pollen after
Ooh.
their beekeeper died. And I was like, surely that's not like that's cap, right? Like,
Yeah.
but apparently, I looked deeper into this. Apparently, like petunias and some lilies and irises and things have black pollen.
Huh.
So I was like, oh
Those are some
well,
goth bees, man.
I know. I was like, I really hope that one's true. That's kind of slay. But even if they are not true, the symbolic weight of the idea of the bees mourning their keeper is
Mhm.
very present. The most recent thing that I remember of this is that when Queen Elizabeth II
Yeah.
passed in 2022, there is, in fact, a royal beekeeper, and his name is John Chappell, and he had to go tell the bees of Buckingham Palace and Clarence House that she had passed. Um, and I guess I haven't said this yet for some reason. This is not in my notes, so let's get into what does telling the bees look like.
Yeah. What
um,
happens, Midge? When am
hey,
I what
hey,
should I do when I need to tell some bees that someone died?
yeah. So telling the bees involves approaching the hives very quietly, and you're supposed to give a soft knock at each hive to get the bees' attention. There are also some records of this practice where people have used the house key to tap on the hives,
Mm.
but you give them a soft knock, and then you're supposed to speak very low to them and quiet and tell them whatever you need to tell them. Specifically in this instance, the quote that Chapel Roan said to the
Chapel Roan
bees.
said to the bees.
John Chapel, he told news outlets that he said, "The mistress is dead, but don't you go. Your master will be good to you." Um, and there's also some really sweet versions of this where it's like a rhyming kind of limerick that you say to the bees, but some people sing it to the bees. But the real thing is just to let them know that they are still taken care of, and
Mhm.
that to basically ask them to stay, even though their master has passed on. Um, but that is what it is to tell the bees. I love this little weird bit of folklore, and it was why I was so touched when they decided to put beehives in the cemetery,
Yeah,
because
it's such a charming custom.
yeah, well, and I mean, bees at their core, like what they are is workers. They need they want a job.
Yes.
um, and so I love the idea that them, being placed in this cemetery. Yes, they're making honey, but I hope that they also get to fulfill their other duties and maybe guide some souls into the afterlife as well. That is still
Yeah.
it's a historic cemetery, but it is still there is still some active burial taking place there. So I'd like to think that maybe after funerals they'll go tell the bees to
Yeah, they'll
to
help out.
to go visit and help out.
Yeah, I was excited to see that because it is my historic cemetery also has honey.
Do they?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
so
So they have beehives, and
awesome.
you can buy honey from their office. It's called Silent City honey,
Yes,
which
so
I love.
that is coming for us. They just installed the bees maybe 2 weeks ago.
Oh yeah,
Um, but I have been in contact with BKC that has the hives, and I'm hoping to become a volunteer that helps take care of those hives in particular. And then
yeah,
yeah, they'll be collecting cemetery honey, which is so cool.
yes. It's so cool,
I can't think of anything better for like witch shit than having cemetery honey for.
right?
So that is it for today. If y'all enjoyed this, please do let us know. If this is something you grew up around, like I think maybe some of us are familiar with this concept from like literature and
Hmm.
things, but I guess I didn't ask Penny. Do you remember how you came in contact with this?
No, it would definitely be through literature. I
Yeah,
don't know if it was through a poem or art, but I definitely was kind of introduced to the historic concept of it.
yeah. But if you happen to grow up in a place where this is more active, or if you grew up around beekeepers or what have you, I would love to hear any stories you have about this. This is
Yes.
something that I think is really beautiful and fascinating, and just I don't know, so soft. I would love to, like I said, have bees someday, and I intend to put in my death plan that you better go tell my bees.
Yes, you gotta tell the bees.
uh, Also, if you just like this podcast, we would love so much to hear about it. You can leave us a rating or a review wherever you listen to us. And if for some reason where you listen does not allow you to type out a review, you can share those with us over on Instagram and our direct messages. You can leave comments on Spotify. And I believe Penny has some sort of thing to share with us. I don't remember what.
I do. So I have. It's a compliment, but it's mostly a story, and that I felt like you needed to hear about, Midge,
I can't wait.
because this comment is from Spotify on our Wax Museums episode.
Okay.
This comes from Flynn E. Ryder 50,
Work.
who says, yes, says, love the show. It reminded me my college had a Halloween party at Madame Tussauds in New York City. We had the whole run of the place. It was awesome.
What?
Each floor was different, a dance floor, a food floor. One floor even got turned into a haunted house you got to go through with actors. It was a blast. I had so many pictures with all the figures. It was great. We couldn't book that place again because someone cut an ear off of one of the
Oh my
figures.
god.
I don't know which one. I want to say Patrick Stewart, but I'm not sure.
Not giving him the Van Gogh treatment.
Truly,
Oh
as
my
soon as I read that, I was
gosh.
like, Midge needs to know about this. All the people.
I I have never so badly wished that this was a visual medium podcast so you could see my face right now.
Yes.
Whoa, that is
Doesn't that
dope
sound
as hell.
amazing?
I mean, it's like my worst nightmare, but it
Right?
also sounds
I know. I
awesome.
was like, as I was reading, I was like, Midge would be both like fascinated and terrified by
I would
this.
I would be living in a true liminal space between like ecstatic and horrified.
Especially like a haunted house with actors, but in a wax museum where
But
you
like
don't like presumably you
the
don't know
whole thing
what
is I
figure is
don't
a
want it to
person.
move. Yeah, like
Right?
the
That's
whole
bad
thing
enough
is
in
I'm
a normal
scared.
haunted house where it's just like a dummy, but like a full-on wax figure.
No, because literally my whole fear is this gonna move? And
Yep.
so like I want to know so badly follow up in the direct messages, friend, about like, was the haunted house enclosed? Like, did they do like, flats or anything, or was it like they were standing actors intermingled with the wax figures?
Yeah,
I need to
yeah,
know because I need to know how badly I would have shit my pants.
yes. Yeah, Flynn Rider, if you're listening, send us a DM and give us any more details.
Whew, wow, that's crazy. Yeah, thank you for sharing that with me, both Flynn and Penny, because
Yes.
that's wild. All right. Well, on that note, thank you all so much for listening. If you would like to keep up with us, you can follow us over on Instagram at Ghouls Night in Pod, or you can get involved with us over on Discord. We've got an awesome
Yeah.
Discord server happening with lots of fun chits and chats and channels. And you can also over there suggest episode topics for
Yes,
us too.
indeed.
So if there's anything you're dying to hear us shoot the shit about, head over to Discord. Let us
Yeah,
know.
let us know.
And if you are looking for me, you can find me all over the web at Midge Munster.
And you can find me at Penny Snark.
And until next time,
Good.
goodbye.
Bye.